My mother-in-law slid a prenup across the dinner table and said, "Sign this, Nicole, or you'll never touch our family's money." I smiled, I picked up the pen, and I signed it, what she didn't know. I already owned every property, every account, and every single inch of that family estate. Hey, I'm Nicole, and before I tell you how this story ends, I need you to hit that follow button because trust me, you do not want to miss where this goes. This is a story about being underestimated, about staying quiet when everyone expects you to explode, about what happens when the people who look down on you finally find out the truth. Let's get into it. I didn't grow up with money. My mama worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. We didn't take vacations, we didn't have a big house, and new clothes were a birthday thing, not an every season thing. But I was smart, and I was hungry in a way that only people who grew up without much can understand. I studied business in college, I saved every single dollar I could, and by the time I was 26 years old, I made an investment that most people my age didn't even know was possible. It paid off big. I'm not going to bore you with the details of how, just know that by the time I turned 30, I had built something real: property, shares in a growing company, a financial cushion most people spend their entire lives chasing and never catch. But here's the thing about me: I never flaunted it, I still drove a simple car, I still shopped like a regular person. Where I come from, you don't show off what you have, you just quietly build brick by brick, and you let your bank account speak a language nobody else needs to hear. That's actually how I met my husband, at a small coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday of all places. He didn't know anything about my money. He just saw a woman reading a book alone in the corner, and he walked over and asked if the seat next to me was taken. We talked for 3 hours that day about books, about family, about the kind of life we both wanted to build. He made me laugh in a way I hadn't laughed in years, and something in my chest just settled, like I'd finally found a place to put down my guard. He told me about his family, a well-known, wealthy family with old money, a sprawling estate, a business that had been passed down for 3 generations. He said it so casually, like it wasn't a big deal to him at all. And that's what I loved about him from the beginning. He never once acted like his family's money made him better than anyone else in the room. We fell in love the normal, unhurried way: slow dinners, long phone calls that stretched past midnight, meeting each other's friends. Nothing about our relationship had anything to do with money, at least not at first. Then I met his mother. From the very first hello, I could feel it. The way her eyes moved from my shoes to my bag to the keys in my hand. The way she asked, "And what is it you do?" with a tone that already had the answer decided before I opened my mouth. I told her I worked in finance, and she gave this small, tight smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes, and said, "How nice for you." I remember driving home that night and telling myself it was nothing. Maybe she was just protective, maybe she just needed time. But it wasn't nothing. Over the months that followed, the comments kept coming, small and sharp, like little paper cuts you don't notice until you're bleeding. She'd mention other women my husband had dated, women with family names attached to hospitals and universities. She'd ask me in front of guests where exactly my family was from, like she was trying to place me on a map of people who mattered and people who didn't. She never said the words gold digger out loud, not at first, but she didn't have to. It was in every look, every pause, every question that wasn't really a question. My husband noticed some of it. He'd squeeze my hand under the table or change the subject when his mother got too pointed, but he never fully stood up to her, not in those early days. I told myself that was just how families like his worked. Old money families, I learned, protect their money the way other families protect their children: fiercely, blindly, without asking whether the thing they're protecting actually needs protecting from the person standing in front of them. We got engaged on a warm evening in October, and I have never in my life been happier. My husband got down on one knee in the same coffee shop where we met, and the whole room clapped, and for a moment none of the family drama mattered. It was just us, but that happiness didn't last long because 2 weeks after we announced the engagement, his mother requested what she called a family meeting. I still remember walking into that dining room. The chandelier throwing soft gold light over a table set with more silverware than I'd ever used in my life. My husband's father sat quiet at the head of the table, the way he always did, letting his wife run the room. And there she was at the other end, perfectly composed, a folder sitting in front of her like a loaded weapon she'd been waiting to use. Dinner went fine at first, polite conversation, careful smiles. Then, right as dessert was being served, she reached for that folder, opened it, and slid a stack of papers across the table toward me. "Before this wedding moves forward," she said, in a voice calm enough to be mistaken for kindness, "we need to protect the family's assets. I'm sure you understand." She looked directly at me when she said it, not at her son, at me. I looked down at the papers. A prenuptial agreement, drafted by their family lawyer, stating clearly that I would have no claim, none whatsoever, to any property, business shares, or accounts belonging to the family estate. regardless of what happened in the marriage. My husband shifted in his seat, opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, and then closed it again. His father stared at his plate. Nobody at that table said a word in my defense, and here's what I need you to understand about that moment: it hurt. It genuinely hurt, in a place deep in my chest that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with being seen as less than, being reduced to a suspicion instead of a person. I had loved this family's son with my whole heart. I had shown up to every holiday, every birthday, every awkward family gathering with a smile and an open hand, and in return, I was being handed a document that assumed the absolute worst about me. But here's the other thing you need to understand. While she was talking about protecting the family's assets, I was sitting there with a secret she had no idea existed. Because 3 years before I ever set foot in that dining room, before I ever met her son, I had made an investment in a struggling real estate holding company, a company that was quietly slowly buying up distressed commercial properties in a part of the city everyone had written off. One of those properties, it turned out later, belonged to my husband's family. They had leveraged it heavily years earlier during a rough financial stretch, and when they couldn't keep up with the debt, the ownership structure had shifted through a series of transactions most families never bother to track closely. Especially not the ones who assume their name alone will protect them forever. I didn't even know it at the time I made the investment. I found out only after we got engaged, when my husband mentioned the name of the family estate in passing, and something about it rang a bell. I went home that night and pulled every document I had, and sure enough, there it was, buried 3 layers deep in a holding company I was the majority shareholder of. I owned the paper on their family's estate. Not all of it outright, but enough that if I ever chose to, I could make decisions that would shake their entire world. I never told my husband, not because I wanted to hide something from him, but because I didn't want that information anywhere near our relationship. I didn't want him to look at me differently, and I certainly didn't want his family to ever think I married him for a reason that had already, quietly, resolved itself in my favor years before we even met. So when his mother slid that prenup across the table, demanding I sign away any claim to a family estate I already legally had my hands on, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly, something calmer, something almost amused. I picked up the pen and I signed every page without hesitation. The look on her face was priceless. She had expected tears or arguing or at the very least some kind of pushback. Instead, she got a woman who signed her name with a steady hand and pushed the folder back toward her with a small, polite smile. "Is that everything?" I asked. She blinked, clearly thrown off, and said yes, that was everything. From that night forward, the family treated me differently, but not in the way you'd think. It got worse, actually. Now that I had confirmed I had nothing, the subtle disrespect turned less subtle. I was seated further from the head of the table at gatherings. I was left out of conversations about the business, about the properties, about upcoming family investments. His mother would talk about the estate in front of me like I was a guest passing through, someone who'd be gone in a few years once the marriage inevitably fell apart, the way she clearly expected it to. I said nothing. I smiled, I nodded, I played the part of the sweet, humble daughter-in-law who had come from nothing and would leave with nothing. And honestly, some days it took everything in me not to say something, but I wanted to see how far this would go. I wanted to see the truth of who these people were when they thought I had no power at all. The wedding happened. It was beautiful, honestly, despite everything. My husband and I built a life together, quiet and full of love, separate in a lot of ways from the noise of his family. But the business, that family estate, kept having small problems that nobody could quite explain. Property tax filings that came back with unfamiliar names attached. Loan renewals that required signatures the family lawyer couldn't quite locate the origin of. A routine audit that flagged ownership discrepancies going back years. I watched it all unfold from a careful distance, letting their own accountant and lawyers slowly, nervously start putting the pieces together. About a year into our marriage, everything came to a head. The family was trying to refinance one of their largest properties, the crown jewel of the estate, and the bank required full documentation of the current ownership structure before approving the loan. That's when the lawyer, a nervous man named nothing I'll bother repeating, sat the family down and told them there was a problem. A significant portion of the property, the holding company that controlled it, was not fully owned by the family anymore. It hadn't been for years. And the majority shareholder was someone named Nicole. I got the call from my husband that evening. His voice was shaking, somewhere between confusion and disbelief. "Is this you?" he asked. "Is this some kind of mistake?" I told him the truth calmly from the beginning. How I made the investment years before we met. How I found out after we got engaged. How I chose not to say anything because I never wanted our marriage to be about money in either direction. The family meeting that followed was nothing like the first one. This time I was the one sitting at the head of the table, papers in front of me, though I never once raised my voice. His mother sat across from me, pale, quiet in a way I had never seen her before. She kept looking at the documents like she was hoping they'd rearrange themselves into a different story. "You could have told us," she finally said, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "I could have," I agreed. "But you handed me a paper telling me I deserved nothing before you ever asked who I actually was, so I let you believe that for a while. I wasn't cruel about it." I didn't gloat and I didn't throw the prenup back in her face, even though every part of me could have. I simply laid out the reality. I wasn't interested in taking anything away from the family. I never had been. What I wanted was respect, the kind that should have been there from the very beginning, the kind that isn't conditional on what someone owns. My husband, to his credit, didn't defend his mother that day. He sat beside me, held my hand, and told his family plainly that the way they had treated me was wrong, and that it had nothing to do with what I did or didn't own. That mattered to me more than any property ever could. In the weeks that followed, things changed slowly. His mother apologized, not all at once, not perfectly, but genuinely in the quiet moments when it counted. She started asking me questions about my life, my work, my opinions, actual questions, the kind you ask someone you respect. The family business restructured its ownership properly, fairly, with me choosing to stay involved as a partner rather than someone who simply held power over them. I didn't do it to control them. I did it because, strange as it sounds, I had grown to care about that family estate too, the history in it, the people it was meant to support. Looking back now, I think about that night at the dinner table more than I probably should. The way she slid that prenup toward me, so certain of what she thought I was. And I think about how easy it would have been to react in anger, to throw the truth in her face right then and prove a point. But staying quiet, staying calm, letting the truth reveal itself in its own time, that taught me something I don't think I would have learned any other way. You don't have to shout to be powerful. You don't have to prove your worth to people who have already decided not to see it. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply sign the paper, smile, and let time do the talking for you. If you've made it this far, thank you for sitting with my story. If it moved you even a little, drop a comment and tell me what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have stayed quiet like I did, or would you have told the truth right then and there? Hit that follow button if you want more stories like this one. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and I'll see you in the next story.